Welcome everyone, thanks for joining me for my Bloomburrow Prerelease guide. In addition to this guide, I will also be participating in the streamer event hosted by Wizards on the 24th starting at 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. Watching the new set in action is a great way to prep for your pre-release, and I hope to see you there joining me in chat and watching how I play with the cards. But before anyone gets a chance to play with the cards, let's talk about this set. I think there are some really big picture topics that need to be discussed first and foremost. So I'm going to talk about those before the set mechanics, before archetypes, before any of that other stuff. I think the first big picture thing is that this set starts on turn 1. Not every set starts on turn 1. Some start on turn 2. This set starts on turn 1. I think no matter what deck you're playing, there are good 1-drops in the format. And lots of them. Expect to face them even in sealed. Expect to face them definitely in draft. If you are late to the board, the game could be over by turn 3 or 4, and you're not going to recover. So there are good 1-drops. There's great 2-drops as well. This set is an aggressive set. I don't want that to be taken the wrong way either. I think there is a place for control, and we'll get to that later. But just know that the aggressive decks in this set are very aggressive, and they start on turn 1, so your deck that's a control deck needs to start on turn 1 as well. The other thing that I'm noticing is that there are a ton of ways to ping you for 1 with direct damage. There's also some pings that involve drain where you're pinging them for 1, you're gaining 1 life, but there's also just so many more things that just do 1 damage to face, 1 damage here, 1 damage there, and it adds up. So knowing that, I expect life gain, lifelink, all of that's a little bit more important than it normally is, right? Because if somebody's trying to out aggro you and burn you down, even a little bit of life gain can go a long ways in giving you that 1 extra turn to win the game against them. So definitely put a priority on lifelink and life gain a little higher than you normally would. You know, obviously it's not necessary to do well, but I do think lifelink is going to play a crucial role in helping you not die to those super aggressive decks that are in this format. There's also a super legitimate go wide strategy, mainly involving rabbits, but it looks pretty incredible. And to go with that, there's a lot of ways to pump the board. So it's not just that there's a lot of ways to make your board state wide. There's also tons of opportunities to give good group pumps. So I do think that going wide strategies are something that's going to be a big deal in the format. So I do expect a lot of opponents to be playing a go wide aggressive strategy with group pumps at the end game. The other thing that I think you need to be aware of is that there is a new set mechanic called Valiant. I do think this keyword ability is set defining. It's maybe the most important one of the set. You could argue that Offspring is maybe equally important, but I think Valiant is a big deal in that it slaps. Like, you know, like there are certain creatures that have Valiant on them that you're just like, whoa, that's a pretty great card. And so because Valiant payouts are so good, the enablers, creatures that have abilities that target your own creatures that enable that Valiant multiple turns in a row for either free or for a low cost of 1, those creatures should go up on your evaluation scale when you're thinking about building decks in the set. Ways to target your own stuff is going to be critical to optimize your Valiant, and if you can do that, you're going to be a very challenging aggressive deck to overcome. So, you know, as good as the go wide strategy and the Valiant strategies and the ping you down strategies are, is there a place for control? I do think so. And I like the blue control. I don't know if it's going to be everyone's favorite style to play with, but if you open a seal pool that is living its best flicker value control life, then I think you should go with it. I don't think it's something you should just like say, well, everybody's going to be aggro, so I don't have time or room to do control. I don't think that's the case at all. I think you do, and I think it can be very good. But I want to emphasize that if you're going to go the control route, you do need to have those answers to those 1-drops and those 2-drops. You need to be able to disrupt the aggro curve out so that you can come back and stabilize. Because blue is missing good early creature plays. It starts coming in at turn 2-ish, and turn 3, there's some good 3-drops in blue, but I do think that you're going to be relying on either your second color for those early 1 and 2 drops, or you're going to have to do a lot of bouncing and control to be able to control the pace of the game so it doesn't get out of hand. I think blue doesn't necessarily have to be slow and control either. There are some good aggressive cards like the Waterspout Warden. I think most blue decks are going to be looking for cards like run away together to do a lot of work to slow down your opponents. You'll be looking to flicker your own cards for value. I do think cards like Splash Portal that, don't look great on the surface do much better when you have a card like Dream Dew Entrancer. I mean, that's a crazy bounce target, right? So I think there are certain cards that make you want to go into the flicker value and control that blue is doing. I just want you to be careful to make sure you're not ignoring your early game and not losing every single game by turn like 3 or 4. And if you're playing blue as a more aggressive color, things like Shore Up that can trigger Valiant, save your own creature, untap it, maybe you eat one of their attackers as well on their turn. Those things can be good in a blue deck. So I do think that blue has a place, especially like blue-white flyers, the birds, of being a little bit more aggressive than control. But I think a lot of people going into blue will be doing kind of a more of a soul tie, blue, green, black value, or like a blue-red spells kind of deck. I think blue-red spells can be teetering more towards the aggressive strategy. What about mid-range decks? Just kind of like on the surface of things, the raccoons seem really good. They're big. I don't know if they're necessarily better than the red-white at the moment in time. We'll just have to see how well the games play out. I think the mid-range squirrel deck is maybe a little bit too finicky. I think the forage has a place, but I don't think many seal pools are going to have all the pieces exactly right to make the squirrels deck work. Another general broad-based thing I want to talk about is just removal. The importance of 2 mana removal versus 3. I think in this set you do want to have at least 2 spells that are 2 mana removal if you can possibly muster it. I know in sealed you don't have a lot of control over that. It's at the mercy of what you open. But if you're not dropping a 2-drop, being able to remove a 2-drop is pretty good. So definitely having the cheaper removal, especially for when you're on the draw versus the play, is probably going to be a little bit critical, just knowing how fast those Valiant red-white decks can get out of the gates. The last thing I want to touch on before we move on to some more specifics is that it is a 2-color set. Like, I am a 5-color drafter. I go for it. I love a good brew more than probably anybody else. But this set really wants you to kind of stick to 2 colors. I don't think you have to every time. Certainly in sealed, you're probably going to have to stretch to that 3rd color just because some sealed pools just can't play 2 colors with play boosters. That's just not a reality. But overall, it's an easier set to build with because the creature type kind of gives away what does it want to be doing and how do you want to be doing it. So I think if you're building and you're newer to Magic and you're not sure what you should be doing, if you look at like the creature types, it's a pretty good way to start building the core of your deck in a very simplified way. If you're doing the same creature type, a lot of them just go together. So it's a very straightforward set in that they kind of take a lot of the guesswork out of it by giving you strong creature types in each color pair, and the creatures in those color pairs with those creature types do the thing to help you do the win con of each color. So I'm just going to put the archetypes up on the screen really quick. Here they are. I take these with a grain of salt, of course. I think that although these are good guidelines, finding the cross synergies that are, a little bit more creative is where I find joy in Magic. So, for instance, a card like this is a mouse. It's supposed to go in a Valiant deck, but what if I had this blue card? That's clearly supposed to go in the non-creature spells matter otter deck. I could see this being a very powerful combo, especially if you have a deck full of things like Hop on It, copying spells twice in a turn. You're not technically playing blue-red spells, and you're not technically playing white-green rabbits. You're doing some sort of weird mix under the framework of birds. So that's what I'm trying to say is like, yeah, the animals are a good framework, but within that framework, there's also other archetypes you could definitely do. You don't have to just play blue-white flyers. All spells decks don't need to be blue-red spells decks. They can be black-red spells decks, right? So there's all these other subtypes that you can use one color from the archetype to mix with a different color and do maybe some sort of mix. And in sealed, that's a valuable tool to know that you can do that going into it. I want to just briefly touch on the mechanics. There's Offspring. When you cast a card with Offspring, in addition to its regular mana cost, you can pay the extra Offspring cost at the time of casting it If you do, you make a 1/1 token creature that's the exact copy of the creature, except it's a 1/1, so it'll have all the abilities. They'll trigger twice. I think Offspring in general are pretty good. Sometimes you'll want to run the creature out. Sometimes you'll want to wait to be able to pay Offspring. It just depends on the card and the board state and the situation in the game. Gift is a little more complicated. As you cast the spell, you can promise a gift, and it tells you what the gift is on each card. So sometimes it's a fish, sometimes you're giving them a food, sometimes they get to draw a card. Then below, it will tell you exactly what happens if you did or if you did not promise the gift. So you have to decide that as you're casting the spell, as it goes onto the stack. As the spell resolves, and or as the permanent enters the battlefield, your opponent will then get their gift before any other actions of the card. The spell has already resolved. So there's no interruption phase between when they draw their card and when what the card is doing resolves in full. So all the actions on the card happen. The spell has already resolved technically by the time they get their gift, so they can't interrupt it. They can't counter it after they get their gift. They can't kill a creature in response after they get their gift. It isn't an action that can be interrupted. All of this happens as the card resolves, and the gift happens first before the actions of the card. So on this card in particular, if they draw the card that you're giving for the gift, it's in their hand of cards that you can then select from to take. So just know that that resolves first. This card is pretty much the only one where that matters so much so far that's been printed. But yeah, gift is pretty simple. I think sometimes you do want to give the gift. I think most of the times, maybe not. You have to read your board state. You have to read the pace of the game to know whether gifting is correct or not. Foraging is pretty simple. It's pretty straightforward. To forage, you exile 3 cards from your own graveyard, or you can sacrifice a food, either or. And then you get to do whatever the card says you get to do for foraging. I think forage is maybe my least favorite mechanic in the entire set so far. Valiant, I touched on that. Valiant triggers when the creature with the keyword Valiant on it gets targeted by a spell or an ability. It triggers once per turn. You can trigger it during your opponent's turn, as well as your own, once each time. Cool ability. I think it's a very good ability. It's maybe my favorite mechanic of the entire set. Expend is a number that the card specifies how many mana you have to spend on spells that turn for Expend to trigger. I think Expend has a nice place. It's basically free for doing what you're already doing. My problem with it is it can fizzle hard. I just imagine you getting into a top deck battle and you have no spells left in your hand. Your opponent has no spells left in their hand. You need an Expend trigger to be able to push your damage through, but you draw a land and you brick. So not only is that bad because you didn't get an extra creature on the board that turn and your top deck was bad, but it's just extra bad for your Expend deck because now you're not expending, you're not triggering your stuff. Your stuff is weaker because of it. So I don't know how I feel about Expend. I'm sure it's fine. I just think that it will be more particular than you want it to be. There's also a run of paw print seasons where you can choose up to 5 paw prints worth of modes on these cards. These seasons are great. I'm really excited to play with these seasons. I think they're all pretty much good. The one that I think is like maybe the weakest of the bunch is maybe the red one. Maybe just a little bit less excited about the red one, but all the rest are just very close in power level. I really think they all have a fantastic place in this set, and that they're very good cards. If you open them in your seal pool, I think they're worth playing most of the time, especially if you're playing the color that's on it. For this set, it's much more about the color pairs and what those want to do for the archetypes than like the individual color. What are you in general wanting to be doing? However, the seasons, I think, really hint at what does that color want to do more than anything else. So, when in doubt, look at each season card, and that's what that color wants to do. So white, clearly you want to be going wide because it gives you an option to make a bunch of rabbit tokens to go wide. Obviously, there's some aspect of control needed in white. And then also there's this whole 3 mana or 3 power less matters in white that's very prevalent. Clearly, no matter what white deck you're playing, this card would be extremely beneficial, and it has kind of a mode for everybody, and all the seasons do this. I think the blue Season of Weaving definitely hints at blue's color in general, really wanting to lean into ETBs and drawing cards and controlling the board by bouncing. All of those things are present on this card. Like if you're doing a spells deck, The more cards you draw, the more spells you can storm off with and really start casting in a chain. If you're looking at ETBs, creating tokens that have the same ETBs and copying them, well, that's great too. And then also just the control of the bounce is the big overarching thing of almost any blue deck is the bounce flicker. Bouncing for tempo of your opponents, bouncing your own stuff for better ETB values, and it does that as well in the last mode. So blue, really look to be doing those three things if you're playing blue. Season of Loss probably doesn't represent black as a color as strong as it could in terms of like overarching themes. What do you want to be doing if you're black? It has some elements to what black wants to do overall, but it's definitely the least representative of the color as a whole. I think black does want to play a controlling graveyard matters game, so I don't think you mind sacrificing a creature for your opponent's creature because you will be doing some sort of graveyard shenanigans or threshold 7+ cards in your graveyard matters. That's where that comes in. I think a lot of times with this card, you're probably going to pay 3 paws for each player sacrifices a creature, and then you're going to draw 3, selecting the second mode once. That's probably the most likely way you're going to use this card, unless like you're about to win the game and you can make opponents lose life, which kind of leans into black's whole thing of burn, small edges. The bats are really into pinging for 1, so are the lizards. So black does have this element of direct damage in this set. The red Season of the Bold. Yeah, this one. I think what they're trying to do here is help you go either more aggro and get you more cards so that you can play more little mice or little lizards. There's also the burn aspect with the third mode where you're pinging 2 damage to any target creature. I mean, that seems, I guess, helpful if you're trying to do small things and clear out the board for an attack in. I think exiling the top 2 cards of your library until the end of your next turn, and you may play them, is kind of the whole theory here. Maybe playing into the spell slinging deck a little bit, and maybe getting some treasures so that you can have more mana to cast more spells. This one seems to be a little bit less cohesive with what red's trying to do, and maybe just a little bit too slow to really help the red decks out as much as you'd want it to. It's still an okay card, but I just don't think it's really on the same level as the other seasons. Lastly, we have the green Season of Gathering. 1/1 counter on a creature you control. Gains vigilance and trail till end of turn. I mean, that's just great if you went wide. Doing that 5 times seems pretty incredible. You can also just destroy all the artifacts or enchantments that are on the board. I'm not sure why you would want to do that in green. I think you'll most likely have the stronger enchantments, but maybe you're playing against white and all your creatures are under enchantments. So I just think that's a little bit less likely, but maybe. And then the last one is draw cards equal to the greatest power among creatures you control, definitely indicating that green wants to go big in the end game with, things like the moose, obviously, and other large cards. So Season of Gathering definitely plays into green's whole idea of either go wide or go big or both. So very cool card. There's also hybrid mana cards in this set. At common, there's a whole run of them, and I think in sealed, they're very flexible. Like, don't leave them out. Let's say you're playing black-white and you have this Cutthroat. Well, you can still play it. It's a 2-in-1 black card. You don't have to have red in your deck to play it, so don't overlook these just because they have 2 colors on them. They can be just cast as one of the colors appearing there. I think they're going to be pretty critical commons just to help you stay open during the draft a little bit longer without having to commit to 2 colors, since, again, I do think this is very much a 2-color set. There are only 10 special guests in the set. There's only a 1.5% chance of it being in a pack, so, I just don't expect it to make any impact on the format whatsoever. The artifacts in general are kind of not much to talk about. None of them really make me that excited. I think personally something like Patchwork Banner looks better for this set than it normally would. I think this is a very playable Mana Rock plus Anthem. The uncommon lands are okay. They do some cool things and definitely worth playing if you're playing those colors. I think the ones that sacrifice are pretty strong, but obviously you're losing a land to do it. And then there's other ones that are just a repeatable ability. Unfortunately, I think that Rabbit Response is just going to be a great card. And sets where that card is a great card tend to be pretty straightforward aggro. I think that a lot of players, a lot of decks are going to want to go wide and just curve out and cast that, which is fine. Whether you're doing that with bats or mice or rabbits or lizards or birds, it really doesn't matter. I think it's just going to make white a pretty good color in the set in general. You know, there's a lot of cool creatures to build around. I think some of these are super powerful. I'm just showing you images of the cards I'm probably most excited to play with. There's also just a few commons and uncommons here that I think are going to outperform. Maybe people underestimate them early in the format. I think they will do well based on how they line up with the other cards. But time will tell. I can't wait to play this set in early access. Thanks for your support. If you're still watching, please hit that like button. It really helps other people find this video. It helps them find my channel. If you haven't subscribed yet, please consider subscribing to me. I am a small channel and I'm always looking to grow. And if you have any questions, feel free to leave them in the comments. I am really good at answering my comments. So thanks for watching. Thanks for all your support. And I will see you next time and hopefully at the streamer event.